There is a specific, suffocating kind of silence that falls over a first-class cabin when someone is publicly humiliated, a quiet mixture of complicity relief and weaponized privilege. 16-year-old Myra Hollins felt the weight of a dozen wealthy eyes burning into her back as she was escorted down the aisle of Flight 802. Her oversized college hoodie and faded sweatpants made her a stark target for their baseless judgments. The woman in seat 2B smirked, taking a slow sip of her pre-flight champagne, victorious in her cruelty. But what that passenger, the spineless flight crew, and the arrogant gate manager didn't know was that Myra wasn't just some random teenager flying standby. She was the only daughter of Jonathan Hollins, and within exactly 4 minutes, their entire world was about to come crashing down. The chaotic hum of John F. Kennedy International Airport's Terminal 4 was a sensory overload, but to 16-year-old Myra Hollins, it was just the final hurdle before she could finally sleep. It was a rainy Friday evening in late October, the kind of miserable weather that made travelers irritable and airline staff short-tempered. Myra had just wrapped up a grueling week-long college tour across the East Coast, an exhausting marathon of campus visits, interviews, and alumni dinners. She was dead tired. Her feet ached in her scuffed sneakers, and her hair was pulled back into a messy bun. Dressed in her favorite oversized gray Yale hoodie and loose, comfortable sweatpants, she looked every bit the exhausted teenager she was. She certainly didn't look like the typical first-class passenger on a transcontinental flight to London Heathrow, a fact she was acutely aware of, but too tired to care about. The ticket seat to a first class had been a surprise gift from her father, Jonathan Hollins. Jonathan was a man who preferred to stay out of the public eye, but within the global logistics and tech infrastructure sectors, his name moved mountains. He was the CEO and majority shareholder of Vanguard Global, a supply chain behemoth that essentially dictated how cargo moved across the Northern Hemisphere. He had bought the ticket using his immense cache of miles, wanting his daughter to have a safe, comfortable, and undisturbed flight home after her hard work. Group 1 First Class and Diamond Elite members may now board. The voice over the intercom crackled. Myra gathered her canvas tote bag, slipped her boarding pass onto her phone screen, and joined the short, exclusive line. The gate agent, a harried-looking man whose name tag read Gilbert Thomas, barely glanced at her phone as he scanned it. The machine beeped a pleasant green tone. "Have a good flight," Gilbert muttered mechanically, his eyes already shifting to the next passenger, a tall, impeccably dressed woman reeking of expensive perfume. Myra walked down the jet bridge, the heavy scent of jet fuel and sterile conditioned air washing over her. She stepped onto the massive Boeing 777 and was greeted by the lead flight attendant, Brenda Mitchell. Brenda's smile was polished, practiced, and distinctly corporate. "Welcome aboard. Boarding pass, please?" Brenda asked, her eyes doing a quick, almost imperceptible sweep of Myra's attire. Myra held up her phone. "Seat 2A. Brenda's practiced smile faltered for a fraction of a second, a tiny glitch in her professional matrix. "Oh, 2A, of course. Right this way, miss." Myra settled into the luxurious, pod-like seat. It was a secluded haven of dark, leather-polished wood trim and a massive screen. She sighed in relief, immediately reaching into her tote bag for her noise-cancelling headphones. She just wanted to disappear into a playlist and wake up across the Atlantic. 5 minutes later, the peace was shattered. Eleanor Bingham was a woman who navigated the world with the absolute certainty that it belonged to her. In her late 50s, draped in a cashmere shawl and sporting a blowout that defied gravity, Eleanor was a Diamond Elite frequent flyer who treated commercial aircraft like her personal living room. She marched down the aisle, her designer handbag thumping against the seats, until she arrived at 2B, the seat directly across the aisle from Myra. Eleanor stopped. She didn't sit down. Instead, she stood in the aisle, staring openly at Myra. Myra, catching the movement in her peripheral vision, looked up. She offered a polite, tired, closed-mouth smile and went to put her headphones on. "Excuse me," Eleanor said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it possessed a sharp, carrying quality that cut through the ambient noise of the boarding cabin. Myra paused, pulling one ear cup back. "Yes?" Eleanor's eyes raked over Myra's faded sweatpants, the Yale hoodie, and her youthful, exhausted face. Her gaze lingered on Myra's dark skin, her expression tightening into a mask of thinly veiled disdain. "Are you lost, sweetheart? Economy boarding hasn't started yet. You're blocking the aisle for the first-class passengers." Myra felt a hot prickle of embarrassment at the back of her neck, but she kept her voice steady. "I'm not lost, ma'am. This is my seat. 2A. Eleanor let out a sharp, breathless laugh, looking around as if to share a joke with the rest of the cabin. 2A, that is highly unlikely. Did they overbook the back and stick you up here on a standby pass? Because I specifically requested a quiet cabin, and I don't appreciate the airline using first class as a spillover for teenagers. I'm not a standby passenger," Myra said, her voice dropping an octave, trying to keep the situation calm. "My dad bought this ticket. I'm supposed to be here." Eleanor's eyes narrowed. The word dad seemed to trigger something deep within her entitlement. She didn't believe it. To Eleanor Bingham, the world was ordered in a very specific hierarchy, and the black teenager in the baggy hoodie sitting in a $10,000 pod completely violated her sense of order. "We'll see about that," Eleanor snapped. She turned her head, raising her hand and snapping her fingers sharply in the air. "Stewardess." "Excuse me." "Flight attendant." "Brenda." The lead flight attendant rushed over her face a mask of concern. "Yes, Mrs. Bingham, is there a problem with your seat?" "Not with my seat," Eleanor said, gesturing dramatically toward Myra. "With hers. I need you to check this young woman's boarding pass immediately. I believe she's in the wrong cabin, and she's being quite defensive about it. I pay a premium for a secure, exclusive environment. Brenda, not a high school cafeteria." Myra felt the eyes of the other boarding passengers, settling heavily upon her. Her chest tightened. She hadn't done anything wrong yet. She was being treated like a trespasser in plain daylight. "Mrs. Bingham, please let me handle this," Brenda said, her voice adopting a placating, soothing tone that immediately signaled whose side she was instinctively leaning toward. She turned to Myra, her professional smile completely gone, replaced by a look of weary suspicion. "Miss, I'm going to need to see your boarding pass again." Myra's hands shook slightly as she unlocked her phone. She felt a deep, twisting knot of anxiety in her stomach. She opened the airline app and held the bright screen up. "I showed it to you when I boarded. Seat 2A, Myra Hollins." Brenda leaned in, squinting at the screen. She looked from the phone to Myra, then back to the phone. The QR code was there. The name was there. The seat assignment was undeniable. "Well," Eleanor demanded, crossing her arms over her cashmere shawl, "is she supposed to be back in row 40 or not?" It says 2A." Brenda admitted, her voice hesitant. She looked at Eleanor as if apologizing for the computer's error. "The pass is valid, Mrs. Bingham." Eleanor's face flushed a deep, ugly red. She was not a woman who accepted being wrong, especially not publicly. When the facts didn't align with her reality, she simply altered the reality. "Valid, please." Eleanor scoffed, her voice rising in volume, ensuring the entire front of the plane was now an audience. Anyone can fake a screenshot these days. Look at her. Does she look like she belongs in first class? She's a teenager traveling alone. She's carrying a dirty canvas bag. I fly this route twice a month, Brenda. I know the clientele. She is making me extremely uncomfortable. Myra's breath hitched. Uncomfortable. The word hung in the air, heavy and loaded. It was the ultimate weaponized phrase, a trigger word designed to invoke a specific kind of corporate panic. "Ma'am, I am just trying to go home," Myra said, her voice trembling, despite her best efforts to sound strong. "I am not bothering you. I haven't even spoken to you." "She has an attitude," Eleanor hissed to Brenda, entirely ignoring Myra. "She is aggressive, and I will not spend a 7-hour flight sitting next to a security risk. I want her moved. Now, or I am calling the Diamond Desk and having your job." Brenda visibly panicked. Eleanor Bingham was a known entity, a high-value customer who spent hundreds of thousands of dollars a year with the airline. Myra Hollins was in Brenda's eyes a nobody in a hoodie. Corporate policy dictated de-escalation, but in reality, it often meant appeasing the loudest, wealthiest voice in the room. "Miss Hollins," Brenda said, turning back to Myra, her tone suddenly chillingly authoritative. "I need you to gather your things. We are going to have to resolve this at the front." "Resolve what?" Myra asked, tears of frustration pricking the corners of her eyes. "You just saw my ticket. It's valid. I'm in my seat." "Please don't raise your voice at me," Brenda said sharply, employing a textbook deflection tactic. "If you refuse to cooperate, I will have to call the gate manager." "Call him," Myra insisted, feeling the crushing weight of injustice. "I haven't done anything." Brenda picked up the interphone and murmured into it. 2 minutes later, the heavy footsteps of Gilbert Thomas, the gate manager, echoed down the jet bridge. He stepped into the cabin, looking deeply annoyed at the delay. "What seems to be the issue?" Gilbert asked, looking between Brenda, the irate Eleanor, and a tearful Myra. "Gilbert, thank God," Eleanor said smoothly, her tone instantly shifting from angry to victimized. "This young woman is in 2A. She claims she has a ticket, but she's been incredibly hostile and disruptive since I boarded. She's making a scene, and frankly I feel unsafe with her in the cabin." Gilbert didn't ask Myra for her side of the story. He didn't ask to see her boarding pass. He looked at Eleanor, recognized her elite luggage tags, and then looked at Myra. His bias formulated a conclusion in a matter of seconds. A disruptive teenager. A wealthy, frequent flyer. The math to his bureaucratic mind was simple. "Miss," Gilbert said, stepping toward Myra's pod, his physical presence looming over her. "You need to collect your bag and step off the aircraft." "What?" "No," Myra gasped, clutching her tote bag to her chest. "My dad paid for this seat." "She's lying." "She came up to me and started harassing me. Miss, if you do not step off the aircraft voluntarily, I will call Port Authority police to remove you." Gilbert stated, his voice devoid of any empathy. "You are causing a disturbance and delaying a scheduled international departure. Grab your bag, now." The threat of police was the breaking point. Myra was a 16-year-old black girl in America. She knew exactly how quickly a situation with law enforcement could turn dangerous, even fatal, regardless of her innocence. The fight drained out of her, replaced by a cold, terrifying survival instinct. Trembling uncontrollably, a hot tear escaping and tracking down her cheek, Myra stood up. She grabbed her tote bag. The silence in the cabin was deafening. None of the other passengers looked at her. The men in business suits suddenly found their phones fascinating. The woman in 3A looked out the window. As Myra stepped into the aisle, Eleanor Bingham sat down in 2B. The older woman smoothed out her cashmere shawl, picked up her glass of champagne, and took a sip, a smug, satisfied smirk playing on her lips. "Finally," Eleanor muttered audibly. "Some peace and quiet. It's awful." Myra walked down the aisle. Her head bowed, feeling stripped of her dignity, her humanity reduced to an inconvenience. She walked past Brenda, who wouldn't meet her eyes, and followed Gilbert off the plane back up the cold, sterile jet bridge. The heavy metal door of the aircraft shut behind her, with a definitive echoing thud. The gate area at Terminal 4 was nearly empty now, save for a few stranded passengers sleeping on the uncomfortable metal benches. Gilbert Thomas escorted Myra to the main desk, typed aggressively on his keyboard, and slammed a piece of paper on the counter. "I have rebooked you on the red-eye departing tomorrow morning at 6 a.m., Gilbert said, without looking at her. "Middle seat economy. You are lucky we didn't ban you from the airline entirely for your behavior. You can wait in the terminal overnight." You can't just leave me here," Myra said, her voice cracking. "I'm a minor. I don't have a hotel. You literally stole my ticket." "Your ticket was refunded to the original form of payment, minus a rebooking fee for the disruption," Gilbert snapped, utterly callous to the reality of leaving a 16-year-old girl stranded in an airport overnight. "We have zero tolerance for aggressive behavior toward our elite members. Count yourself fortunate, Miss Hollins. Now I have paperwork to file." Gilbert turned his back, vanishing into a back office, leaving Myra completely alone at Gate B-24. Myra stood there for a long moment, the sheer absurdity and cruelty of the last 20 minutes washing over her. She dropped her tote bag onto a nearby seat and sank into the chair next to it. She pulled her knees to her chest, buried her face in her arms, and finally let the dam break. She sobbed, her shoulders shaking, the humiliation burning like acid in her chest. She had been thrown away like garbage because a rich woman didn't like the look of her. After several minutes, she wiped her face with the sleeve of her hoodie, her hands shaking so badly she could barely hold her phone. She unlocked the screen. It was 7:45 p.m. She opened her contacts and tapped the star icon. Dad. 200 miles away, in a sleek glass-walled penthouse office overlooking the Manhattan skyline, Jonathan Hollins was in the middle of a high-stakes, closed-door meeting. Around the massive oak conference table sat 3 vice presidents of Vanguard Global and a team of corporate lawyers. They were finalizing the acquisition of a European shipping fleet, a deal worth upwards of $2 billion. Jonathan was a striking man in his late 40s. He possessed a quiet, terrifying intelligence and a presence that commanded absolute authority. He rarely raised his voice. He didn't have to. When Jonathan Hollins spoke, Industries listened. His personal cell phone, resting face down on the table, began to vibrate. Jonathan ignored it. He never took calls during acquisitions. It stopped. Then 3 seconds later it began vibrating again. He frowned slightly, holding up a single finger to silence his chief legal counsel, who was mid-sentence. Jonathan picked up the phone. He had a specific ring setting for Myra. If she called twice back-to-back, it meant an emergency. He answered, bringing the phone to his ear. "Myra, honey, are you at the gate? Did you board okay?" On the other end of the line, there was no immediate answer, only the sound of ragged, wet breathing. Jonathan's posture instantly changed. The relaxed, confident CEO vanished. He sat up straight, the muscles in his jaw clenching. The temperature in the conference room seemed to drop 10 degrees. The executives around the table went dead silent, watching their boss's eyes turn to ice. "Myra," Jonathan said, his voice dropping into a tone of absolute terrifying calm. Talk to me. Are you hurt? Where are you? Dad. Myra choked out a fresh wave of tears hitting her as she heard his voice. Dad, they kicked me off. Jonathan stood up. Who kicked you off? The airline. Yes. Myra sobbed. I was in my seat. I was just sitting there, and this woman, this white woman, came on, and she started yelling. She told the flight attendant I didn't belong there. She said I was a standby teenager, and I was making her uncomfortable. She said I was a security risk, Dad. Jonathan closed his eyes. His knuckles turned white as he gripped the edge of the conference table. And the flight crew. What did they do? They took her side. Myra cried, her voice echoing slightly in the empty terminal. The flight attendant wouldn't even look at my ticket properly. They called a manager, a man named Gilbert. He came on and told me if I didn't get off, he was calling the police to drag me off. He said I was causing a disturbance. Dad, I didn't do anything. I didn't even raise my voice. The silence on Jonathan's end of the phone was profound. It wasn't the silence of someone who didn't know what to say. It was the silence of a man calculating the exact trajectory of a nuclear strike. Where are you right now, Myra? Jonathan asked softly. I'm at Gate B24, JFK Terminal 4. They left me here. They rebooked me on a flight tomorrow morning in a middle seat and told me to sleep in the airport. Listen to me very carefully, sweetheart, Jonathan said, his voice a steady, grounding anchor for his daughter. You are not sleeping in the airport. Do exactly as I say. Pick up your bag, turn around, and walk to the first-class Delta Lounge near Gate 30. I am going to have someone waiting for you at the front desk in exactly 5 minutes. They are going to take you to a private suite, get you whatever food you want, and keep you safe. Okay. Myra sniffled, wiping her eyes. Okay, Dad. I'm so sorry this happened to you, Myra, Jonathan said, a rare crack of raw emotion bleeding into his voice. I love you. You did nothing wrong. Do you hear me? You did absolutely nothing wrong. I love you too, Dad. Go to the lounge. I will handle the rest. Jonathan hung up the phone. He stood at the head of the conference table for a long, agonizing moment. The executives were staring at him, terrified to speak. Finally, Jonathan looked up. His eyes were devoid of any warmth. Gentlemen, Jonathan said, his voice low and devoid of inflection. This acquisition is paused. We will reconvene on Monday. Jonathan, we have to sign the term sheet by midnight, the chief legal counsel started. I said, we are done for the day. Jonathan cut him off, his glare silencing the lawyer instantly. Jonathan picked up his phone and dialed a new number from his private contacts. He didn't dial a customer service line. He didn't dial the Diamond Elite desk. He dialed the personal cell phone of Richard Sterling. Wait. No, he dialed the personal cell phone of William Kensington, the chief executive officer of Oceanic Airlines. A man who sat on the board of a charity Jonathan funded, a man whose airline relied heavily on Vanguard Global's logistics software for their entire worldwide cargo operations. The phone rang twice before it was picked up. Jonathan, to what do I owe the pleasure on a Friday evening? William's booming, jovial voice echoed through the speaker. William, Jonathan said, staring out the window at the dark skyline, his voice deathly quiet. Your staff at JFK Terminal 4, Flight 802. Just threatened my 16-year-old daughter with police force, ripped her out of her paid first-class seat, and abandoned her at the gate because a racist passenger threw a tantrum. The joviality on the other end of the line evaporated instantly. "Jonathan, what are you sure that can't be right?" "I am not calling for an investigation, William." Jonathan stated his tone, carrying the weight of an executioner. "I am calling to inform you of what is about to happen. You have exactly 10 minutes to recall Flight 802 back to the gate before it takes off. If that plane goes wheels up with the woman who harassed my daughter sitting in her seat, Vanguard Global will terminate its cargo software contracts with Oceanic Airlines globally by 8 a.m. tomorrow." "Jonathan, be reasonable. I can't just recall an international flight." 9 minutes, William," Jonathan said softly. Tick-tock. And he hung up the phone. William Kensington, CEO of Oceanic Airlines, sat frozen in his sprawling Connecticut home office, the dial tone buzzing in his ear like a warning siren. He knew Jonathan Hollins. Jonathan wasn't a man who made empty threats, and he certainly wasn't a man who bluffed. Vanguard Global's logistics software was the digital central nervous system of Oceanic's entire cargo division. Without it, their shipping hubs would be paralyzed within hours, grounding billions of dollars in freight mail and medical supplies globally. The financial loss would be catastrophic, the public relations nightmare apocalyptic, all because a gate agent and a flight crew decided to play favorites with a racist passenger. William slammed his phone down and immediately picked up his secure red line, bypassing 3 layers of dispatch protocol to connect directly to the Oceanic Operations Center at JFK. "Operations, this is dispatch," a voice answered. "This is William Kensington." He barked, the joviality entirely stripped from his voice. "Get me the tower, right now. I need the status on Flight 802 to Heathrow." There was a frantic clicking of keyboards on the other end. "So Flight 802 pushed back 5 minutes ago. They are currently on taxiway Bravo number 4 in sequence for takeoff on runway 22. "Right." William felt a cold sweat break out on the back of his neck. If that plane took off, he was going to lose a multi-billion-dollar contract before breakfast. "Call the tower. Recall the flight," William ordered, his voice echoing in his empty office. "Tell them it is a code red company directive from the CEO. Ground that plane and get it back to Gate B24 immediately. Sir, they are in the active queue. I don't care if they are halfway down the runway, doing 100 knots, William roared. You tell Captain Lawson to hit the brakes and turn that multi-million-dollar tube of aluminum around, or everyone in the operations center is fired. Do it now." Out on the rain-slicked tarmac of JFK, the massive Boeing 777 rumbled as it inched forward in the conga line of departing aircraft. In the cockpit, Captain David Lawson and First Officer Mark Davis were running through their final pre-flight checklists. Suddenly, the radio crackled with a priority override from JFK Ground Control. "Oceanic 802, heavy JFK ground. Cancel your takeoff clearance. You are ordered to hold position. Acknowledge." Captain Lawson frowned, exchanging a bewildered look with his first officer. "JFK, ground Oceanic 802. Heavy holding position. Is there a mechanical issue? Negative 802, we just received a code red from your company operations. Executive order. You are to return to Gate B24 immediately. Turn right onto Taxiway Juliet and contact ramp control." Lawson sighed heavily, reaching for the PA system microphone. Turning a fully loaded 777 haul around in the middle of a JFK rush hour was going to cause a logistical nightmare, not to mention a cabin full of furious passengers. In the first-class cabin, Eleanor Bingham was on her second glass of vintage champagne. She had completely dismissed the unpleasantness with the teenager. In her mind, the system had worked exactly as it was supposed to. The riffraff had been removed, and order had been restored to her sanctuary. She pulled a silk sleep mask from her designer handbag, preparing to recline her pod the moment they reached 10,000 feet. Then the low, steady hum of the massive GE engines suddenly spooled down. The heavy aircraft lurched slightly as the pilots applied the brakes, turning sharply away from the runway lights and back toward the terminal. A collective groan echoed through the cabin. The intercom clicked on. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. I apologize for the inconvenience, but we have received an urgent directive from our company headquarters. We are being required to return to the gate immediately. I do not have further details at this time, but we ask that you remain in your seats with your seatbelts fastened." Eleanor scowled, ripping the sleep mask out of her lap. "Unbelievable," she huffed to the businessman, sitting across the aisle in 2C. "You pay $10,000 for a ticket, and they can't even get the plane off the ground on time. I have a connecting flight to Geneva tomorrow. This is entirely unacceptable." She had no idea that the plane wasn't turning around for a mechanical failure, a security threat, or a weather delay. It was turning around for her. Back inside Terminal 4, Gilbert Thomas was typing a highly sanitized defensive report into the airline's internal system. He categorized Myra Hollins as belligerent, uncooperative, and a threat to elite passenger comfort, justifying his decision to revoke her ticket and strand her overnight. He hit submit with a sense of bureaucratic satisfaction. A moment later, his walkie-talkie exploded with frantic static. "Gate B24, this is ramp control. 802 is pulling back into the alley. Reconnect the jet bridge. Prepare for immediate boarding by executive management." Gilbert stared at the radio in his hand, his stomach dropping. Executive management. That never happened. Planners and executives didn't come to the gate unless a plane had caught fire or a celebrity was suing them. He rushed to the window and watched in horror as the nose of the massive 777 crept back into view, its landing lights piercing the rainy darkness. Before the jet bridge was even fully attached to the fuselage, the secure door near the desk burst open. Through it marched Samuel Higgins, the Vice President of East Coast Operations for Oceanic Airlines. Higgins was a man who survived the brutal airline industry by being ruthlessly efficient, and right now his face was the color of a thundercloud. Flanking him were two armed Port Authority police officers and the airline's chief of flight services. Higgins marched directly up to the gate desk, his eyes locking on to Gilbert. "Are you the gate manager who authorized the removal of a passenger from 2A? Higgins demanded, his voice a low, dangerous growl that commanded the immediate attention of the few remaining people in the terminal. Gilbert swallowed hard, his bureaucratic confidence evaporating. "Yes, sir." "Mr. Higgins, the passenger was highly disruptive and—" "Shut your mouth," Higgins snapped, cutting him off with a violent slice of his hand. "Did you verify her boarding pass? She had a screenshot, sir. But Mrs. Bingham in 2B. I didn't ask about Mrs. Bingham. I asked if the girl had a valid ticket. Did you scan it? Did the system clear it?" "Yes, but—" Gilbert stammered, realizing too late the gravity of his mistake. "She didn't look like she belonged, and she was causing a scene with a Diamond Elite member. I followed protocol for passenger disturbances to protect our high-value flyer." "You didn't protect anyone, Thomas. You just cost this airline our largest global logistics contract," Higgins said, leaning over the desk so only Gilbert could hear the lethal promise in his voice. "You didn't remove a standby teenager. You removed the 16-year-old daughter of Jonathan Hollins, the CEO of Vanguard Global." Gilbert's face drained of all color. His knees actually buckled slightly against the counter. Vanguard Global. The name was legendary in corporate circles. "Hand me your badge," Higgins ordered coldly. Sir, please, I've been with Oceanic for 12 years. Your badge, now. You are suspended pending immediate termination. Get out of my terminal. Gilbert, his hands trembling violently, unclipped his security badge and placed it on the counter. He was a ghost entirely broken by a single catastrophic misjudgment of character. Higgins didn't give him a second glance. He turned to the police officers and the Chief of Flight Services. Let's go. We have a pest to remove. The heavy aircraft door swung open, and Brenda Mitchell, the lead flight attendant, stood there with a practiced apologetic smile, expecting maintenance workers or ground crew. Instead, she found herself face to face with the Vice President of Operations and 2 police officers. Mr. Higgins, Brenda gasped, her hand flying to her chest. Save it, Brenda. Your employment review will happen on Monday, Higgins said, pushing past her into the first-class cabin. The cabin was silent, the passengers watching with wide eyes as the opposing group marched down the aisle. Higgins stopped dead in front of seat 2B. Eleanor Bingham looked up, her expression a mix of annoyance and entitlement. She saw the corporate suit and the police officers and immediately assumed they were there to apologize to her for the delay. Well, it's about time someone from management showed up, Eleanor said haughtily, adjusting her cashmere shawl. I demand to know why we have returned to the gate. This delay is entirely unacceptable. I expect heavy compensation for this. Higgins looked down at her, his expression utterly devoid of customer service warmth. Mrs. Bingham, Higgins said, his voice carrying clearly to the back of the cabin. I am Samuel Higgins, VP of Operations. I am here to inform you that you are the cause of this delay. Eleanor blinked, genuinely confused. Excuse me. I have been sitting here quietly. 30 minutes ago, you falsely accused a minor of trespassing, harassed her, and manipulated my staff into illegally removing her from a seat her family paid for, Higgins stated, laying the facts out like a coroner presenting an autopsy. You violated our code of conduct, and you endangered a minor. Eleanor let out a sharp, incredulous laugh. This is absurd. That girl was a thug in sweatpants. She was aggressive. I am a Diamond Elite member. I spend hundreds of thousands of dollars. You were a Diamond Elite member, Higgins corrected her, his tone dropping an octave. As of 2 minutes ago, your frequent flyer account has been permanently deactivated. Your miles are forfeit, and you are now on Oceanic Airlines' permanent lifetime ban list. The silence in the cabin was so absolute, you could hear the rain hitting the fuselage outside. Eleanor's jaw dropped. The smugness vanished, replaced by a profound, uncomprehending shock. You can't do that, Eleanor whispered, the reality finally piercing her bubble of privilege. I'll sue you. I'll sue the airline. Our legal department welcomes your call, Higgins said, stepping aside and gesturing to the 2 Port Authority officers behind him. But right now you need to gather your bags and exit this aircraft immediately. If you refuse, these officers will arrest you for trespassing on federal property. Eleanor Bingham did not move. For a woman who had spent her entire adult life insulated by wealth and status, the concept of a sudden forced consequence was entirely alien. She stared at Vice President Samuel Higgins, her mind desperately trying to reassemble the shattered fragments of her reality. You are bluffing. Eleanor finally spat, though her voice lacked its previous ironclad certainty. You wouldn't dare delay an international flight and kick off a Diamond member over some misunderstood teenager. Do you have any idea who my husband is? He plays golf with your board of directors. Higgins didn't even blink. He had dealt with billionaires, politicians, and heads of state. A wealthy socialite throwing a tantrum in seat 2B barely registered on his stress matrix. Mrs. Bingham, I don't care if your husband is the President of the United States," Higgins said, his voice dropping into a deadly quiet register that echoed in the silent cabin. "You are currently holding up a multi-million-dollar asset, and you have exactly 15 seconds to stand up before I instruct these Port Authority officers to physically remove you from my aircraft. 10 seconds. The two police officers, a stern-faced man named Officer Miller, and his partner stepped forward. Miller rested his hand casually on his utility belt. "Ma'am, we really don't want to put you in cuffs today. But if you refuse a direct order from the airline's management to disembark, you are committing a federal offense. Grab your bag, now." The threat of physical restraint, of handcuffs, of being perp-walked through a terminal in front of thousands of people finally pierced Eleanor's delusion. Her face flushed a mottled, ugly crimson. The smug superiority that had defined her interactions just 30 minutes prior evaporated, replaced by a toxic cocktail of humiliation and rage. With trembling hands, Eleanor grabbed her designer handbag. She stood up her cashmere shawl, slipping from her shoulders and pooling on the pristine leather of the first-class pod. She turned to look at the other passengers, seeking an ally, a sympathetic face, anyone to validate her outrage. "Are you all just going to sit there and let them do this?" she demanded, her voice shrill. "This is an outrage. I am the victim here." The silence that met her plea was deafening. The businessman in 2C, who had quietly watched Myra get evicted, suddenly found the safety card in his seat-back pocket, utterly fascinating. The woman in 3A firmly put her noise-cancelling headphones over her ears and closed her eyes. Nobody looked at Eleanor. The silent complicity that had aided her bullying had now turned against her. "Walk, Mrs. Bingham," Higgins commanded, stepping aside to clear the aisle. Eleanor's walk back down the aisle was the exact inverse of Myra's. Where Myra had walked with her head bowed in unjust shame, Eleanor walked in a rigid, trembling fury, entirely exposed to the judgment of the peers she so desperately wanted to impress. She marched past the galley, past the flight attendants who stared at their shoes, and out the heavy cabin door into the jet bridge, flanked by the two police officers. As soon as Eleanor was gone, Higgins turned his attention to Brenda Mitchell. The lead flight attendant was pale, her professional smile completely gone, her hands shaking as she clutched her manifest tablet. "Mr. Higgins," Brenda started her voice, a fragile whisper. I was just following protocol. Mrs. Bingham was escalating, and the girl was sitting quietly in a seat her father paid $10,000 for." Higgins interrupted his voice, slicing through her excuses like a scalpel. "You failed to verify a passenger's legitimate boarding pass because you allowed another passenger's blatant prejudice to dictate your actions. You didn't de-escalate, Brenda. You enabled harassment, and you exposed this airline to catastrophic liability." Brenda's eyes welled with tears. "Please, sir, I've been flying for 8 years. I have a clean record." "Not anymore," Higgins said coldly. "Gather your crew luggage. You are relieved of duty pending a full HR investigation on Monday morning. Leave the aircraft." Who is going to lead the cabin?" Brenda stammered, entirely broken. "I have already pulled a reserve crew member from the lounge. She will be here in 2 minutes," Higgins replied. "Get off my plane, Brenda." Brenda, crying softly, grabbed her rolling suitcase from the galley closet and walked off the plane, her career effectively over, because she chose the path of least resistance instead of the path of basic human decency. A quarter-mile away, in the exclusive Delta Sky Club first-class lounge, the atmosphere was entirely different. Myra Hollins sat in a private, soundproofed VIP suite, the kind usually reserved for traveling diplomats or A-list celebrities. The room was softly lit, paneled in rich mahogany, and smelled faintly of lavender and fresh espresso. A plush, heated blanket was draped over her shoulders, and a plate of warm artisan flatbread and a cup of chamomile tea sat untouched on the glass coffee table in front of her. Despite the luxury, Myra was still trembling. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind a cold, hollow exhaustion. She kept replaying the scene in her head, the smug look on Eleanor's face, the cold dismissal from Gilbert, the terrifying threat of the police. It was a trauma she knew she would carry for a long time. There was a soft knock on the frosted glass door of the suite. Myra jumped slightly. "Come in." The door opened, and a sharp, elegantly dressed woman in a tailored navy pantsuit stepped inside. She had warm, intelligent eyes and a calm, commanding presence. "Myra?" the woman asked softly, closing the door behind her to ensure their privacy. "I'm Violet Croft. I'm the Vice President of Crisis Management for your father's company. He sent me to make sure you were safe." Myra let out a breath she didn't know she was holding. "Hi. Yes, I'm okay. Just shaken up." Violet sat down in the armchair across from Myra, offering a gentle, reassuring smile. "I can only imagine. What happened to you tonight was completely unacceptable, Myra. It was wrong, it was unjust, and it was entirely rooted in bias. Your father is furious, and frankly so am I." "Did my dad really stop the plane?" Myra asked, her voice small, the sheer scale of the situation finally dawning on her. "Your father called the CEO of the airline directly," Violet confirmed, leaning forward. "He made it very clear that if that plane took off with that woman in your seat, the airline would lose billions in cargo contracts by sunrise. He didn't just stop the plane, Myra. He forced them to confront exactly what they did to you." Myra looked down at her hands, twisting the sleeves of her Yale hoodie. "I just wanted to go home. I didn't want to cause a massive problem." "You didn't cause the problem, sweetheart," Violet said firmly, reaching out to gently touch Myra's arm. "You were the victim of the problem. Never apologize for taking up space that belongs to you. Do you understand? You earned that seat. Your father provided that seat. You belong there just as much as anyone else in that cabin." Myra nodded, a few rogue tears slipping down her cheeks. The validation felt like a physical weight being lifted off her chest. For the first time all evening, she felt seen. Not as a standby teenager, not as a security risk, but as Myra. "Now," Violet said, her tone shifting to a brisk, efficient warmth. "Drink your tea. Eat something. Because in about 5 minutes, the Vice President of East Coast Operations for Oceanic Airlines is going to walk through that door to personally apologize to you and escort you back to your flight." Myra's eyes widened. "They're holding the flight for me." Violet smiled, a sharp corporate glint in her eye. "Myra, they would hold the sun from rising if your father asked them to right now. But yes, the plane is waiting for you." Exactly 5 minutes later, a polite but firm knock echoed through the VIP suite. Violet stood up and opened the door. Samuel Higgins stood in the doorway. The ruthless corporate enforcer who had just cleaned house on Flight 802. Now looked deeply humbled. He stepped into the room, his eyes immediately finding Myra, who was sitting up straighter, the heated blanket folded neatly beside her. "Miss Hollins," Higgins said, his voice respectful and genuinely remorseful. "I am Samuel Higgins, Vice President of Operations for Oceanic Airlines. May I have a moment of your time?" Myra looked at Violet, who gave her an encouraging nod. Myra looked back at Higgins. "Yes, sir." Higgins didn't offer excuses. He didn't use passive corporate jargon like, "We regret any inconvenience you may have experienced." He knew who he was dealing with and he knew what the situation demanded. Miss Hollins, on behalf of the entire executive board of Oceanic Airlines, I want to offer you my most profound and sincere apology, Higgins stated, maintaining direct eye contact. You were subjected to racial profiling harassment and an egregious failure of our staff to protect you. The gate agent who revoked your ticket has been fired. The flight attendant who enabled your removal has been suspended pending termination, and the passenger who initiated the harassment has been permanently banned from flying with our airline for life. Myra's breath hitched. Fired. Banned. The swiftness of the justice was staggering. She had expected a generic apology voucher. She was getting a masterclass in corporate retribution. Furthermore, Higgins continued, we have refunded the miles your father used for the ticket, and we are crediting your personal account with lifetime Diamond Elite status. None of this undoes the humiliation you suffered tonight, but I want to assure you that the people responsible have faced severe consequences. Myra swallowed hard, finding her voice. Thank you, Mr. Higgins. I appreciate that. I really just want to go to sleep. I completely understand, Higgins said, offering a small, polite smile. Your aircraft has been secured, catered, and is currently holding at Gate B-24. The captain is waiting for my signal to request pushback clearance. Whenever you are ready, I will personally escort you to your seat. Myra stood up, grabbing her canvas tote bag. She felt different now. The exhausted, intimidated teenager who had been bullied off the plane was gone. In her place was the daughter of Jonathan Hollins, grounded by the absolute certainty of her own worth. I'm ready, Myra said. The walk back through Terminal 4 was a surreal experience. Flanked by Violet Croft and the VP of Operations, Myra bypassed the regular pathways. As they approached Gate B-24, the few remaining passengers stared in awe at the VIP procession. A new gate agent, looking incredibly nervous, stood at the podium. As Myra approached, the agent didn't ask for her phone. She simply smiled brightly. Welcome back, Miss Hollins. Have a wonderful flight. Myra walked down the jet bridge for the second time that night. The heavy scent of jet fuel and conditioned air greeted her again. But this time, it didn't feel oppressive. It felt like victory. She stepped through the heavy metal door of the Boeing 777. A new lead flight attendant, an older woman with kind eyes named Nancy, was waiting in the galley. Welcome aboard, Miss Hollins. We are so very sorry for the delay. Let me take your bag. I've got it, thank you, Myra said politely. She turned the corner and walked into the first-class cabin. The atmosphere in the cabin was thick with an electrified, terrified silence. Every single passenger who had watched her get humiliated, who had averted their eyes, who had silently agreed with Eleanor Bingham's racist assumptions, was now staring at her. They watched as the black teenager in the baggy sweatpants and the Yale hoodie walked down the aisle, personally escorted by the airline's vice president of operations. Myra didn't look at them. She didn't need to gloat. Her mere presence was a devastating rebuke of their complicity. She stopped at her row. Seat 2A was pristine, waiting for her. Directly across the aisle, seat 2B was empty. Eleanor Bingham's cashmere shawl and expensive handbag were gone. The half-empty glass of vintage champagne had been cleared away. The empty pod stood as a glaring, undeniable monument to the swift, brutal reality of hard karma. Myra slid into her seat. Higgins stepped up to the edge of her pod. Miss Hollins, my personal cell phone number is on the card in your welcome kit, Higgins said softly. If you need absolutely anything during this flight or any future flight, you call me directly. Have a safe trip to London. Thank you, Mr. Higgins, Myra replied. Higgins nodded, turned on his heel and exited the aircraft. The heavy cabin door thumped shut. The locking mechanism clicked with a definitive, satisfying sound. The intercom chimed almost instantly. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We have resolved our corporate delay, and we have been cleared for immediate taxi and takeoff by JFK Tower." Flight attendants prepared doors for departure and cross-check. Myra pulled her phone out of her pocket. She opened her messages and typed a quick text to her father. "I'm in my seat." They kicked her off. "Thank you, Dad. I love you." The reply came 3 seconds later. "I love you too, sweetheart. Get some sleep. I'll see you in London." Myra smiled a genuine, warm smile that reached her eyes. She slipped her phone into her pocket, reached into her tote bag, and pulled out her noise-cancelling headphones. As the massive Boeing 777 pushed back from the gate, the engines roaring to life. Myra reclined her $10,000 pod, closed her eyes, and let the gentle vibration of the aircraft lull her to sleep. She had never felt safer. The real-life consequences of unchecked privilege and corporate bias are rarely met with such swift, decisive justice. Myra Hollins arrived in London safely sleeping peacefully through the flight in Seat 2, while Eleanor Bingham spent the night sitting in a hard plastic chair at JFK, frantically trying to rebook a flight on an airline that hadn't permanently blacklisted her. The fallout was severe. Gilbert Thomas and Brenda Mitchell were formally terminated, and Oceanic Airlines was forced to implement sweeping mandatory anti-bias training protocols across their entire global network under the watchful, unyielding eye of Vanguard Global. Jonathan Hollins didn't just protect his daughter that night. He sent a massive shockwave through an entire industry, proving that respect isn't an elite perk to be bought. It is a basic human right. The empty seat beside Myra served as a silent, powerful reminder karma, when properly motivated, always arrives on time.